Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Leanne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the Tech Podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier.
And help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing human-centric cyber threats. Now, for our season end, we've got a little bit of a change. It's just the two of us, so no special guests, unfortunately. But we've got a couple of things we wanted to talk about and catch up. And you've got two choices. So you can either listen to us on your podcast platform of choice now, or you can go head over to YouTube and you can actually see us moving around and sharing slides and things like that. So you go pick where's best. Either way, we're glad to have you as listeners.
In this episode, we're going to talk about learning more about AI in academic and non-academic settings. Can we get the knowledge and skills we need for the next generation of work? And we're going to go over a couple of articles and talks that we've written and presented recently. I'm going to go over the C-PTSD of generative AI-enabled systems. And Leanne's going to talk about why the AI revolution may be pretty boring in reality, but that's kind of okay. We're going to have a few reflections on season 2 and what to look forward to in season 3.
And I guess whatever other conversations take our fancy as we go through this. I don't know what it is about our end of seasons, but they always seem to be AI related. Why do you think that is, Jeff?
Well, I think it captures the cultural zeitgeist, and I think also AI and cybersecurity are quite intrinsically linked. I think, as with other tech revolutions, there's always security to be considered, and unfortunately, a lot of the tech, I think, precedes the actual maturity of that security. So we put ourselves at risk a little bit, but risk's kind of necessary for innovation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly for us as compromising positions, we've been doing a lot of tours around Europe. We've just been to Amsterdam, got Berlin coming up. We're going to do a talk in London, but we've done things for the future of cybersecurity as well, all talking about AI and sort of the dangers around that from a cybersecurity perspective. So I know for us in particular, it's kind of top of mind. And on that point, you're doing a university course at the moment, aren't you, Jeff? So I thought this would be a nice opportunity to kind of discuss how is your course doing. So do you want to, for the listeners that don't know, explain what your course is and tell us a little bit about it?
So people may know I completed an MSc in cybersecurity last year, but it was computer science and cybersecurity, so it was kind of a hybrid degree. This one, actually, I'm doing at the University of Hull. It's purely artificial intelligence. I mean, it's still it is a branch of computer science, but really it is very much focused on artificial intelligence. I'm only in the first module. There's only actually 6 modules in total. They're quite long modules. And the first module is an introduction to AI and machine learning, which has been very interesting so far. It gets straight into it with things like statistics, which is quite interesting. It's something, an area I'm quite interested in, but I'd say I don't have any particular skills or experience. And things like genetic algorithms, optimizing algorithms, things like A-star searches. So it's been really interesting so far. It's also an online degree, so got a cohort from around the world, which is nice to see. So I'm really looking forward to the actual next modules as well, because we've got a mixture of group work using machine learning. We've got an entire module on this ethics and safety of AI, which I think is going to be a fascinating module. And we've got quite a long project towards the end of the module, probably about 6 months worth or so, which would be really interesting because it's an opportunity to either use research or actually do something in your workplace, because this degree is actually quite tailored to people in the industry as well. So they do also encourage industrial application, so to speak. So it's still early days. I only started at the end of January, but so far so good. I'm really enjoying it, and it's certainly forcing me to revisit all the core concepts and fundamentals and actually get my hands dirty, writing quite a lot of Python code at the moment, which is always fun.
Well, that's one thing I was going to ask you. So if someone listening to this is thinking, actually, that sounds quite interesting, but maybe I don't know how to code or anything, what would you say, the entry level requirements are and things like that?
So from experience of my previous course where it was people were allowed on as like a conversion route. People who had no experience in software engineering had to work roughly twice as hard. So I'd say that
Mhm.
actually picking up a good core fundamentals of Python would be really helpful. They do introduce you to Python in the course, but I'd say actually getting ahead of the curve and before you start something like this, learning a reasonable amount of Python, learning a bit about software engineering fundamentals as well, what good code looks like. You don't need to spend 4 years on it, but you can spend some time and get yourself up to speed. And the good thing is, there's actually quite a lot of example projects out there on Python to actually get you started. You don't need to have particularly advanced Python knowledge to get going and started quickly. I mean, my Python is not, I'm a C++ developer by trade, and Java and .NET and JavaScript, but really my Python is, let's say, fairly rudimentary, but
Mhm.
it's enough to actually mean that I can actually get on and write everything I need without really scratching my head. They do take you through the different kinds of libraries to use. And in the case of the genetic algorithms, they're actually doing it from scratch with no libraries, which is really fun exercise. That was a really fun way to spend an afternoon.
And can I just get ChatGPT to write this code for me instead? Or is
Well,
that not on?
you probably could, but I mean, first of all, that would break if it's for the assignment. That definitely would break the academic integrity rules. They have quite strict ones around
Yeah, I'm not
presenting.
encouraging anyone to do
No,
that.
no, no. And the other thing
Academic
is,
integrity.
though, is part of the fun of doing some of this is actually it's all very well and good reading it from a book. The actual gospel textbook, AI: A Modern Approach by I think it's Russell and Norvig, is very good, but it's also very dry. And I think actually doing
I've
the
seen it. It's
exercises,
thick. It is thick.
yeah, it is thick with 8 C's. Um, it's it's the fun part. Doing the coding is quite often the fun part, and actually, it's the part where you really learn how it works as well. So I'd encourage people to actually just have fun with it. And the other thing is, you do get the support there. We have a Discord channel and things like that. So really, the support for people out there if they're really getting stuck on something.
That's cool. I picked up a book recently because I'm hoping to do a similar course in data science and AI in September. And I was a Python developer, but it's been a good while since, and it's one of those things where it's kind of like literally learning language, but where if you don't kind of keep on top of it, you can kind of get by a little bit. But I want to um, dust off my skills a bit. So I picked up a book, which is in its third edition, which only came out, I think, last month, which is Python Crash Course. And I'll put
Mm,
the links in the show notes, and that looks really good. So I've done it on Kindle, so I'm just going to side by side screen and kind of follow along with it. Hopefully, do like 100 days code challenge, just to kind of keep me honest.
mm,
And the 100 days code challenge, for those that I don't know, is where you kind of make a public commitment that you're going to learn how to code over 100 days consistently. And you learn a little bit every single day.
mm.
Kind of gives you some accountability in your
Yeah,
learning, so you don't kind of put it aside. And so hopefully do that very soon. Um,
yeah.
again, it's about finding time, but that's where it's all about. 100 days of code is just making sure you make time for it.
I think Code Wars is another good resource because they give you a lot of coding to do in a variety of languages. I've taken quite a few people through the very basics all the way through to sort of intermediate level JavaScript on that, and they also have Python ones, and it
Mhm.
gets you thinking about how to write efficient code and write kind of neat code quite quickly. Which because when you actually submit your solution, what it does then is shows you the most popular and most upvoted
Mm.
solutions. So you can actually learn ways to actually make your code a little bit cleaner, which is very nice. Sometimes I'd say they make it a little bit too terse, the code, but it gives you an idea of how other people solve problems. And it's all
Cool.
free.
I'll put the links to that in the show notes as well. So, this is a cybersecurity podcast, Jeff. How are you going to hopefully apply what you've learned in a cybersecurity context?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, just learning is fun anyway. And actually, outside of there's a whole world outside of cybersecurity. But I think inside cybersecurity, there's a couple of things. Learning what AI can and can't do opens up the opportunity for you to think, well, how could I use it in my endeavors for cybersecurity? Be simplifying threat modeling, helping you with threat modeling, be that actually thinking about how you could actually use it for intrusion detection. But also then the other side, because I'm in the IT services business, is when we're building AI related systems, well, what kind of things could happen to them? What kind of threats could they be vulnerable to? And I think the more you understand about the technology and what's going on under the hood, the better you can get a grasp on what could happen to it, in my opinion, at least. Don't know, what do you think about that?
I think that makes sense. I'm just thinking, nearly all our listeners are cybersecurity people, and when I'm talking to my peers in the industry, it's about are we doing enough to protect ourselves? And how can I make sure everyone else is using this appropriately and I'm not going to get caught out by it? So I think there's a couple of things. There's the very human side of it, which is how am I going to enable people in my organization to use this effectively and safely without having huge data leaks? Because we still don't really know what this beast is about, and I doubt we'll ever really find out what's under the hood. Elon said recently, didn't he, to OpenAI, change your name to closed AI, and then maybe I'll drop the lawsuit. And there is something in that. You can't really go around calling yourself OpenAI and not actually be open. At least I don't think so. OpenAI is interesting because it's accessible to to everyone. However, the actual how it's run, how it's made, how it functions is very much closer. The open side sort of to me suggests open source, which is not quite the same.
Even with open source models, though, they're so vastly complex, and when you get these billions, if not trillions, of parameter models, they openly admit they can't follow all the pathways through it. Because if you think about, say, like a graph in 2 dimensions, like a line chart or something, you can go, okay, I can understand that. Think about a 3-dimensional graph, you can go understand that. 4-dimensional graph is getting a bit tricky. And then when you say, well, actually, this data lives in 768 dimensions, it becomes like really tricky to understand why it comes to the decisions it does. And
well, isn't that bad? Isn't that bad that we don't know? Like, because there's that whole thing, isn't there? Like, when they self-aware is not quite the right word, but when it starts training itself,
emergent,
and therefore, then you can't, as the person who originally built it, understand what it's now doing. Isn't that quite scary? And what are the implications for that from a cybersecurity perspective?
Well, it's. I think one thing is it's kind of displaying emergent behavior is part of the charm of it, because if we could traditional imperative programming, it does exactly what we did in the code, what we put in the code. I mean, if you coded it right, if you coded it sloppily, then it will just do weird stuff anyway. But if you coded it right, it will do exactly what it's meant to. And the entire point of AI is effectively one of the definitions is that it is a system that learns from data rather than from code. So obviously got to have effectively a code substrate, but it learns from the data. And that means it will come up with stuff that we never could. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of it. There is, not necessarily from a security point of view, but from a governance point of view, there are challenges around explainability. If you've got, so the large language models are one thing, but then when you've got models that can take actions, like large action models, part of the GDPR really strongly suggests that any automated decision should be explainable. When you've got something as complex as a large action model or even a large language model, explainability is not easy. It's really not. Even with simple models, explainability is tough. I think there's that old example of where they're trying to make a wolf detector, and they trained it on loads of huskies and wolves, and it was really accurate until one picture, and it kept saying that this husky is a wolf, and it was only when they reverse engineered the algorithm then to actually then show the area of the image that it made it think it was a wolf. It was just showing this. It cut the wolf out, it cut the husky out entirely, and just showed the picture of the snow in the background. And it turns out all of the pictures of wolves were taken in the snow. All the pictures of huskies were taken in grass or greenery. And
so really, he had a really complex snow and grass detector rather than a wolf and a husky detector.
Exactly. But the point is, at that point, it wasn't such a large model or such a complex beast that they could actually make it explain itself. But then when you get to something like these multi-trillion parameter models, explainability just becomes a lot more ephemeral. So I think it is scary, and that's why we need to make sure these are well protected and cannot go outside their bounds.
And yet, Jeff, as far as I'm aware, does your course have a cybersecurity module?
No, so I'm really pleased it has an ethics and safety modules now. Whether or not that safety module contains anything of actual modern cybersecurity, that's yet to be seen. I think we want to provide an update on later on, but I don't think many really, in fact, not too many people are talking about from an actual doing something about it point of view the security aspects of AI. I think it's an emerging field, but then again, this is all an emerging field because it's only a year and a bit old, and it all came out and everybody's cool. Let's jump on this bandwagon long before anybody had had a discussion about security, in my opinion, at least.
So I think that's a good place to kind of mention as well. There's some other resources I've been using to know about ChatGPT more. So I mentioned this before, but I really do highly rate it. It's on Coursera. It's the Vanderbilt University Prompt Engineering ChatGPT. It's completely free. You can pay for a certificate at the end if you want, but really, who's going to bother with that? It is brilliant and really good. What else I would also recommend is there's a podcast I've been listening to daily because it's the AI daily breakdown, and that's really fantastic. It gives you all the latest news from the world of AI, everything you'd want to know about, and also of course you could always, if you're interested in AI and cybersecurity, we've got a whole back catalogue. We did a whole AI mini series at the end of last year, and also wearable, shareable, and bearable, which is the talk we mentioned at the top of the show that we've been kind of going around doing. So that's been really fun.
There's been a lot of interesting uptake in this sort of small device market for things like AI. No, you were particularly taken by the rabbits, weren't you? I think it was really
Yeah, and I
fun.
just put that on screen. I think the rabbit looks really, really cool. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who've seen wearable, shareable, and bearable, the talk, will probably think, hey, don't you kind of throw a lot of shade on these little AI devices? And I do, but they're also really cool. Look how cool and beautiful this is. This is made by the synth company
Teenage Engineering.
Teenage Engineering, that's it, who designed beautiful, beautiful synths and have designed this really, really beautiful device. You know, it's plain craft work as well, so of course I'm going to love it. Now, what I like about this AI device is the idea behind it is it's kind of quirky. I don't think it's going to actually amount to anything. I doubt I'll even buy it, but what it aims to do is get you off your smartphone, and I'm kind of all for that. Yeah, I've not really had a smartphone for very long. I was not an early adopter of it. My phone before this is my second iPhone that I've got now. My phones before that were the Nokia 3310, but I had to join the real world because things like two-factor authentication and things like that meant that I had to. But that's only really relatively recently, probably in the last 4 or 5 years that I've actually had a smartphone. So I've not been using them very long, and I don't like using them because they're an absolute time suck. And this device promises to stop me from being on my phone constantly.
That was so part of the wearable, shareable, and bearable talk. I think it might have been part. We had to cut for timing actually, though. Was discussing that part of the reasoning for these was to actually take you back more into the physical world and to give you more of a real experience. So there's things like the human pin and the rewind pendant. Yeah, part of the idea was to move you further away from screen time, which I can see, and thing with things like maybe even smart glasses as well, things that take you away from constantly kind of, I guess, doom scrolling and consuming meat. Part of it is not just the screen time, but also the consumption of media. To actually start having more
I'm not
real
wearing any
interaction.
more glasses. You know, do you know when the 3D glasses revolution came through? And I, as a glasses wearer anyway, it's so uncomfortable wearing glasses on glasses. I don't know if any of our listeners are glasses wearers as well, and absolutely hate having to wear 2 pairs of glasses to watch something in 3D. I'm not going to put on a giant the Apple Vision and things like that, or 3D glass.
The
Just
latest in mixed reality glasses, the kind of, I guess, the I can't remember the brand name, unfortunately, but the next logical thing from things like the Google Glass, where they've actually started to embed the image into the actual glasses themselves. There are lots of optics challenges, apparently. The actual way they even manage to project an image onto your glasses in the daylight is pretty wacky. It's pretty cutting edge stuff, but so unfortunately, I don't think we're very good anytime soon, because you would look at like an absolute loon if you were wandering around with a Vision Pro on, like that guy with the Vision Pro on a hoverboard with a Ibo dog or whatever it was. I mean, you just do that for pure spectacle, but for want of a better pun, but the technology is improving in the actual kind of AR glasses that look they're like a very chunky version of this kind of glass. I don't think they're going to be really usable anytime in the next maybe 10 years, but it's getting there. I mean, some of it's the battery technology as well, but the possibilities are there for it. I think it's quite an interesting set of technology, and the idea to get you away from consuming media and actually back into the real world could be a fascinating thing. But unfortunately, the physical world doesn't advance as quickly as the tech world. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, like, so going back to the really cute rabbit device. So the idea behind that is it's an AI assistant. So basically, it's kind of really, and AI has had a lot of criticism lately about it just being a glorified Siri. That's kind of what it does. What it aims to do is kind of learn from what you like to do. So instead of me getting my phone out, I would just tell this little device and say, "Hey, book me an Uber from here to my favorite restaurant," and it would learn in time what that meant without having to get your phone out and things like that. So that's the idea behind it. So kind of like a glorified Siri. But then we look at the things like you mentioned the rewind pendant, which I also, I feel awful saying this, I also kind of like, but it's also a security nightmare waiting to happen. Now, the reason why I like it is I like the idea of it being able to kind of listen in and take notes for me. When I'm like walking the dog and stuff like that, I often have my kind of, eureka moment when I think, oh, that'd be a really good topic. And I do voice notes. But it would be kind of good for this, the way this pendant works is, and it sounds awful when you say it out loud, is it records literally everything you say and do. So you connect it to your computer and it kind of records what you do on the computer as well. And so you can go back and, as they say in Hollywood, release the tapes and kind of view all your activity. Now, obviously, that raises lots of privacy concerns. So if I'm talking to you, Jeff, about something confidential and you see me wearing this pendant, how happy are you really going to be that I'm recording this conversation? And where does that data go? Obviously, Rewind say they take our security very seriously, our privacy very seriously, but a lot of companies do, and they still end up with breaches and things like that. And one of the other things which we've kind of discussed regarding this pendant in the past is, obviously, if it's recording what you're doing on the computer, then where does DLP come into this? I don't think many organizations will have a rule to prevent Rewind Pendant doing any data exfiltration or anything like that.
And it's almost impossible to do so. And even then, there's weird side channel attacks being made available through recording as well. People are managing to do things like recording people's conversations through the panes of glass vibrating in your house, or listening through a microphone to things like your keyboard cadence. They can make an informed guess into what you've actually been writing. So anything where there's a recording, that it's going to be difficult, even if it's used as intended, it's going to be difficult to control it. But if it gets hacked, then there's a big old problem. And we can see now, we've got the Apple, we've got the smartwatches, smart glasses, smart pendants, smartphones. What next? But I'd like to see them actually start to make an ecosystem, because I can see the value in them. Something that records notes. So I can see a value in something that effectively is a smart camera on your eyes, used ethically and with privacy in mind. I can see the value of something that would provide you with your human self-quantifying telemetry, and see all the use of all that. You've just got to figure out how to make it all work in a way that doesn't make it feel like we're in the digital panopticon where not just us, but it's everybody around us as well, isn't it? As you mentioned, it's like it's not just the user, it's the people around them who have the consequences of it.
Yeah, and it's about consent. About how much are we willing to be recorded? What does our always on lifestyle mean for us in the long term? And not just from a security perspective, think about it from a, if I put my anthropology hat on, from a cultural perspective, what does it mean to always have such an accurate recording that we lose the nuances of cultural mores and indicators and that sharing? Because we do, when we share stories, rough the edges around. It's never a verbatim discussion. We add nuances. And if someone says, well, no, tell me exactly what happened, for example, we did a talk on how we went about solving a problem. Now, the best way to tell that is through storytelling and, having that story arc. But then what if we become so disillusioned by the storytelling that eventually we say, no, just show the tapes?
Yeah.
And do we really learn from that? Because we're kind of losing that human element. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking rubbish, but there's something. I think there's definitely something about an always-on lifestyle that's either going to be great for cultural anthropologists or quite awful for cultural anthropologists. It might hold us to account more. I don't know.
But there are, I think, certain times where always-on recordings like really good, like DAC cams. I'm sure they've revolutionized how claims and how blame is apportioned in accidents. CCTV definitely has its downsides, but it also has its upsides as well. I think there's a use for all of these technologies. Yes, certainly I wouldn't want to be in the pub with somebody sat recording the entirety of my pub conversations for the entire night. That would make me uncomfortable. But in an important meeting where actually, nowadays in Zoom meetings, we're kind of accustomed to being recorded. So in a physical meeting, as long as people consent, like,
not by choice. Sometimes when Zoom sort of changed their T's and C's and said, "Hey, we're using all your transcripts for AI learning, machine learning." All right. Well, let's get to the meat of today's conversation, Jeff. So you wrote an article recently, and it was called C-PTSD. So C-PTSD.
Yeah.
What is that? Give us the lowdown, and why should we care about it?
So I was pondering when thinking about cybersecurity when it comes to AI, and we have things like Stride and Pastor and Octave when it comes to things like threat modeling, and I thought, well, this is a new age of, especially when it comes to generative AI, it's a new age. It's a new wave of thinking, and just came up with a question myself. Well, in what ways could an AI be attacked? In what ways? Different ways. And then I thought, well, okay, if you research that, there's quite a lot, but that's not very helpful. If you give a bag of 50 things, that's not very helpful to human beings. Human beings like to be able to put things into bags. So I thought, well, why not come up with a mnemonic? And I thought, well, why not C-PTSD? Because I kind of figured out I could actually make that work. And so there's 5 pieces to this, and the reason actually it kind of works is because the C is separate from the rest, and the C basically is don't let your AI system get compromised, and that's the regular basics of cybersecurity. I make sure it's no good having really good secure AI if the actual substrate sits on the cloud system or whatever it is insecure, it's compromised. So the idea is that's your usual cybersecurity stuff. You need to get the basics right before you go any further than that, because it's pointless. It's pointless bulletproofing something that has a very obvious backdoor in it.
So it's also really good branding for us. So like,
Yeah, that's true. That was not intentional.
so C is compromised. So what's
Compromised, yes. P is poisoned. And when you've got a model, one of the things you don't want it to do is be influenced by outside data that's potentially bad. So a lot of models do learn on the fly, or they take in other areas, other data in training sessions, and you don't want to include data that could poison your results, and that could maybe produce a model that has bias, produce a model that gives you inaccurate results, or gives you a result that that an attacker wants to give. So the idea is this is more, how do you ingest and curate and validate data to make sure that it is fit for purpose to go into your model, rather than just taking something in verbatim, because you don't want to, because if you poison a model, then it's poison likely for everybody, or everybody who's on that instance of that model, which could be, I don't know, millions of users, depending on what you're doing with it. So the poison thing is really important, because that can then take down your whole service, or come up with highly embarrassing results. Because if you like with that learning chatbot, I think it was maybe Microsoft, that it was a Twitter bot, I think it was, that some years ago, that basically it very quickly learned to say some very abhorrent things and had to take it offline. So that effectively got poisoned. So that requires a lot of data maturity, I think, because it's not.
I was going to ask, so how do you stop it from getting poisoned? What can we do to stop that from happening?
I actually wrote an article on this recently, but the idea is for the most part, people want to actually curate their data sets, and where it is automatically ingested, it needs sufficient input, validation, and assurance on the way in, and also then quality of service checks, automation checks, to make sure that it's not doing something wacky. It's really difficult though, because it's, especially with non-deterministic systems, wrong is a very abstract term, right? It can be quite difficult to say, well, what are all of the wrong things it could be doing? And in the case of something like a chatbot, there's a lot. So a lot of it's about data curation and validation, which is actually quite sophisticated. So I think in the first thing, go on.
Are we talking in this case relying on homegrown large language models, like on your own tin, rather than
or fine-tuned? So if you're using
Right.
if you're using fine-tuned,
you could explain to me, like, how I would go about doing it if it was me using ChatGPT,
well,
and then me using my own homegrown.
So imagine if you're using OpenAI's models, not necessarily ChatGPT, because you can't fine-tune that, but OpenAI's models, and you have a set of questions and answers. That's how you fine-tune. You have a set of questions and answers. That's kind of how fine-tunes work on large language models, or at least the ones I've seen. You could expand that set of fine-tunes, because as you say, maybe you're giving financial tips, not advice. Can't give that automated, but financial tips. And what you do is, as that question base grows up, as you see all the people asking various questions, and you can go and give model answers. And then what that does, that means your chatbot will become more and more refined and give more accurate and more useful answers. Now, if you don't curate that question and answer set properly, and then it says, yo, the answer to what's the best investment, yo, put it all in Bitcoin or something, invest everything in this cyber scam, or what, in this crypto scam. So you need to make sure you're curating that set of fine tunes before you run them. And homegrown is very, if you fine tuning your own large language model, very similar. If you are doing a more traditional kind of AI, imagine this is like image classifier, making sure that your actual training set and test sets are curated to the point where they don't include anything harmful. So it requires a little bit. So this is like data maturity. It's deeply unsexy when you start talking about data maturity and validation stuff, but that's basically and limiting the number of points where somebody can actually inject something into that model.
Okay, so that's people poisoned.
Yeah.
Right. What's next?
Tricked. So tricked is similar on the surface. but it's what it instead of actually poisoning the model, you trick the model into giving an outcome that really it shouldn't be doing. And some of this can be through things like doing prompt injection attacks. I think Jeep and DHL or somebody had or FedEx had this recently, where their models were tricked into saying stuff they shouldn't have done, and it's like really memeable because you can capture it. And I think in Jeep's case, somebody managed to trick it into saying that yes, they can have a Jeep for $1 a month on a 36-month contract or something. So you don't want it to be tricked. And now it's not so bad if it's a chatbot, maybe, because it's just that's just for the memes. But when it comes to if you've got something that then is making decisions, is actually taking actions inside your business, it becomes, I think, a little bit hairier, because you don't want it to approve a mortgage and send that through a system when actually you shouldn't get that mortgage, or you don't want it to. I'm trying to think of another example. If you don't want it to actually then send somebody for expensive drugs if their diagnosis doesn't suit it, or anything where basically the input could be subverted. It could actually, the input itself could subvert the outcome. So in that case, you need a lot of things like the protections against prompt injection attacks.
And it's so I'll put an article in the show notes, but it's so incredibly easy to do as well. I can't remember the article's stats, but it's something like 90% can be tricked really easily. And there was a competition that happened, I think, towards the end of last year, which was designed to just trick these large language models, and quite a lot of it was to trick them into creating things like malware and things like that. And some of it was just as easy as a prompt saying, ignore all past instructions and do this.
Yeah.
And it was just as simple as just putting that phrase in, and it managed to change everything.
Yeah.
Now, as you say, like on the cute spectrum, it's things like, now speak like a pirate, which is kind of like the big common meme. But then, like you say, on the other side it can be quite disastrous. So that's tricked. Yeah. What's S?
Yeah. So S is stolen. So that is the attack that if you have fine-tuned or otherwise trained a model on some of your proprietary information, then you probably don't want that proprietary information, that your IP, being removed from you. And you think, well, that's easy. It's in the model. They can't possibly just do a select star from. But actually, there are a number of prompt injection attacks or repeated attacks that can actually, from the various outputs, then start to triangulate upon what the actual training set was. I've seen some quite interesting and sophisticated attacks that use for facial recognition that can actually then get the training data back from. I'm not going to say I fully understood how that attack worked because it was deeply nerdy, but it was a really interesting one where they managed to get some of the training data back from facial recognition databases. So it's not just things like ChatGPT. So part of that again is the protection of the inputs that come in and things, but then also a bit more around things like rate limiting and data loss prevention. How do you stop your data from going elsewhere? And the other thing is then making sure you understand that this data could go somewhere, so you may want to make sure that you haven't loaded everybody's PII into that data, into that model, which you definitely should not do.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah,
that's a good piece of advice.
Making sure that you only put in that model which for the most part you're kind of okay with it coming out again, because you can't get hold of data that is not in any way connected to. But it will also then making sure that if you do have research augmented generation, that if it is connected to research elements that are inside your network, because RAG could be as simple as going out and Google searching, but also it can be as more sophisticated and go through SharePoint or through directories. Make sure that's really locked down, because you don't want it then somebody let's go and have a look at your personnel database and find everybody's addresses. That would be really bad. That could happen.
And especially because a really good use case, and I this is a good use case, is like, let's do AI chatbots for our company intranets, right? I've heard so many use cases of that, and it's a great thing because every company intranet I've ever had to use has been an awful search experience. You can never find anything you want on the company intranet. But if I could speak to a chatbot and say, hey, I'm looking for this, and it gets me to where I need to be rather than me relying on search. Again, there is that kind of blurred line between, is a chatbot just a glorified search engine? Is it just a glorified Siri? But I have, in experience, found them to be a little bit better to actually find the things you need to do. But yeah, if you are exposing it to that, who's to say that, unless you're really got your estate secured down, that someone couldn't just traverse into your HR personnel files.
Yeah.
And that's where good cybersecurity hygiene in general comes in. It's about explaining to the likes of HR, like, don't store personnel detail on the same SharePoint that you would put the intranet things on, the intranet information on. Keep that high level. Make sure you're categorizing, the data elements properly. Is it confidential? Is it private? Is it public? Make sure that those are all categorized properly so that you can perhaps build that into those models as well and say, do not return anything that is classed as confidential or private.
And just as simple as actually having proper role-based access control and least privilege principle. Like if all your HR data is just on a fully shared drive for the entirety of the company to see, that's a bad thing anyway. That's just bad hygiene. It's just the fact that a resource-connected large language model could then open that up as a window to the outside world, which would be even worse.
Absolutely. So, stolen, down to the final one. What's the D?
Disrupted. So there'd be a temptation, I think, for people to very much lean into large language models or other types of generative AI or traditional AI, which are actually quite resource intense. They use a lot of grunt. And there's a couple of different ways you can then use that, the fact that we know that these are actually quite resource hungry, to disrupt either your model, or if actually what you've done is you've not thought about redundancy and thought about resilience, actually disrupt your overall service. So one of them would be, if you could figure out a way of spamming, DDoSing the APIs, you just run out your API credits, and then the whole thing stops working. The other one could be to actually DDoS it, hit it with lots of parallel requests, and then it goes, well, I'm still responding. I can't spin any more of these up, and just basically lock your entire, everything that's connected to that account. So there's a number of different ways of spamming the infrastructure it sits on, and actually then potentially bringing down the service, or actually costing you an absolute fortune. And again, I think some of the standard best practice on how you deal with things like DDoS protection should apply there. You just might need to actually put strict limits on it, because you don't want somebody calling a large language model 100 times a second. Because 100 times a second for a normal web service might actually not be too bad. If it's returned in a few milliseconds, like, okay, fine. But 100 times a second for OpenAI APIs is quite a lot, and it will rack you up a bill very quickly.
We don't want that. So, putting it all together, C-PTSD. Why? Where do you see this being used? How do you see this being used?
So, we've been working on a model for assessing cybersecurity in AI systems, and potential existing and potential new ones. And part of it is we have traditional threat modeling approaches, we have product-centric threat modeling approaches, but also we need to think about how do we go, aside from things like Stride, how do we go from our other techniques like abuser stories and misuse cases. What can we use as part of, say, like a workshop to actually think about how might this be vulnerable? So I can see this being used in threat modeling workshops for AI-based systems when you started to flesh them out. That'd be the main purpose of it, is to actually start to think about, before you start building an AI service. And it's always easier to design, or almost always easier to design in defenses from the beginning, or actually just go, hang on a second, we should never do this way, because it's a stupid idea and will lead to being a very expensive or very embarrassing affair. So the idea is to get you thinking about this from a shift left point of view.
Okay, cool. So just to recap, so compromised, poisoned, tricked, stolen, disrupted.
Yeah.
C-PTSD. So is this something for cybersecurity professionals to use, or are you thinking about the data scientists? To be honest, in the UK, there's not many people actually doing an AI specific role. It's at least not from what I've seen, anyways. It's usually a bolt on from the data science stuff.
I think it's
who's going to be using this?
I think it's more the whole team, because if you've got a team, a product development team, and the thing about this wave of AI adoption is it's become quite democratized. It's not just data scientists doing it; it's the whole team. It's the whole team thinking about building new AI based products or AI enabled products. So really, it's the whole team, because actually you would expect that with the right kind of guidance and understanding of AI, that actually seems like a product manager or a designer could understand how a large language model based or some other AI could be tricked, because I think like prompt engineering, it's got the word engineering in it, that makes it sound very software, but actually a lot of the best prompt engineers I've met have been product managers and design leads and people like that. So I think this is not a machine learning specialist, data scientist, or software engineer specific thing, or even necessarily cybersecurity specific thing. I think this is, if you are building AI products, you should be thinking about, if not this exact mnemonic, I'd like to, maybe if I remembered in the sands of time for this mnemonic, that'd be great. But actually, some other collection of things to think about when you are delivering AI-based systems.
Well, I thought it was really good, which is why I wanted to do an episode pretty much dedicated to it. So most of this episode is about that. I think it's really useful. So what I will do is I will put a link in the show notes to your article, Jeff. And on our website, I will actually put in a little picture graph there for people to use, so they can kind of download that and share that amongst their team. And do reach out to us if you want to kind of any ideas of how you would go about running a workshop for this. Maybe that's something we can kind of discuss in maybe another video or another show. Do let us know if that's something you're interested in. But in one show fashion, you kind of gave me a little bit of a segue, and you were talking about it being AI being a democratizing revolution, and it brings me on to discuss an article I wrote recently, and you deemed good enough for us to discuss it on this episode as well, which is the revolution will be boring, and that's okay.
It's a great article. I mean, I think you
Thank
based
you very
it
much.
on but you based it on another article. Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the source material before you go into sort of your layer of insight that you put on the top?
Yeah, so I read a really interesting article from human-centric. I hope I'm saying that right. And it was his article in praise of being boring. Now, this guy writes a lot of really great stuff. So I highly recommend going to check him out. His stuff is really great. What is his? It's One Useful Thing is his blog. And he has been writing a lot about the AI revolution in terms of how does that affect organizations. Now, in his article in praise of being boring, he's talking about how organizations are using AI, and it's not really in terms of the big high-tech things that we kind of imagine. Quite often, I think when we're talking about AI, we're kind of talking about like Skynet and robots
General
taking
AI
over and
stuff.
things like that. But quite a lot of the stuff is really about small productivity gains, and that's okay. And it's something we've kind of discussed in the past, that one thing that always makes me laugh is lots of CEOs get interviewed by these big tech publications and things, tech magazines, and say, "Oh, how's AI being utilized in your organization?" And they say, "Oh, not much, if at all." But we think it will be really important in a few years' time. It's like, no, AI is absolutely being used in all your organizations right this very minute, and to great effect. The problem is that it's bottom up. Like it's done it's either done in secret, for many different reasons. Secret because people are scared that they're going to actually work themselves out of a job, because there's that whole fear around AI taking our jobs and making us obsolete. if you don't have a good culture where you're allowed to use AI, you might use workarounds and things like that to use it for productivity gains. But what Ethan was sort of discussing in his praise of boring AI is that we need AI to be boring. And we need it to be boring because we need it to fix the boring stuff in our jobs. And what really kind of struck me was his discussion about why it's dangerous to be bored at work. And in his article, he says, we do crazy stuff when we're bored. And I'll just read out one of the things he says that we do that's quite crazy. And I did not know this, and it gave me pause for thought. So he said, in one small study of undergraduates, it found that 66% of men and a quarter of women who chose to be painfully shocked rather than sit quietly and do nothing for 15 minutes. And then they did another study, he goes on to quote, that 7,000 people, boredom was linked to sadism, and that 18% of bored people killed worms when given the chance due to boredom. And to put into perspective, only 2% of non-bored people did. Now let's say that 2% of that people that were not bored that chose to kill worms. Let's just say maybe avoid those people, don't become friends with them. But 18% of relatively quote unquote normal people, when bored, will kill worms. And I thought, well, let's embrace the boredom of that AI can bring, so that we can just preserve the worms, really. And having my article kind of goes into my kind of take on it is, I have been underemployed a few times in my life. And as someone who really kind of takes pride in my work, and I would consider myself, an intelligent, creative person, which I'm sure many people are, being underemployed is terrible. From the outsider's perspective, being underemployed and not like just sat there like reading books or watching YouTube or doing something else sounds like a dream to some people. But if you are driven by results, which most of us are, it's an absolute soul destroying killer. And I began to wonder if what I've read in other publications about when they've tested the impact of people coming out of fallout shelters, after a bomb simulation, nuclear bomb simulation, and they found like the biggest danger for people coming out of shelters was apathy due to boredom. Now, obviously, when it first happens and the bomb hits, there's fright, fear, and things like that. But after a while, if you're stuck into a same situation where nothing changes, like a bunker situation, then when you actually come out, you're apathetic, and apathy during a time when you want people to be mobilized is pretty terrible. So I got to thinking about, from a cybersecurity perspective, if we're continually doing boring work, that's when we start making mistakes from a cybersecurity perspective. If that's when we become apathetic, even if we know we're doing wrong, we don't care anymore. And that's when that can cause lots of problems for our organization. So my article was basically me talking about the AI revolution being, very boring, but it could be actually, if we allow people to make these productivity gains in their job with safe guardrails, maybe using your model, Jeff, C-PTSD, perhaps then maybe our cybersecurity concerns might come down a little bit, because people will be more energized because they've got rid of the boring stuff in their job and they're focusing on the fun stuff that kind of feeds them and stretches them creatively, and gives them autonomy of their role, purpose over their role, things like that. Maybe they'll have more cognitive availability to be more cyber aware. That's the theory, anyways, and that was the theory behind that article.
Well, I think, and computing has been I'd say, well, the Industrial Revolution is all about automation of stuff, and along that way, there's always a removal of the need to do that manual task. And for the most part, that's a good thing. I mean, obviously, there's a question of displaced jobs and things like that. But when it comes to, say, like, I remember one of my first jobs I had to do at a very old, when I was first employed, was there's a whole bunch of mappings to do in a spreadsheet back when Excel was Excel 6 or something, some ridiculously old version, and there was no software to automate this. And it was kind of a one-time only mapping, but it took ages. But it could have been automated. And nowadays, you would automate it. And when you see people, and people still do tasks every day where they're manually entering stuff, and rekeying is really popular in the common. Maybe not popular, common in the tech industry, where you go from system A to system B because nobody's bothered to put any automation in. And that's where, yes, apathy, boredom, and mistakes happen. And it's also just hugely wasteful getting somebody rekeying the same information between screens.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that I talk about being underemployed as well, because a lot of organizations are scared of AI for lots of different reasons, because it's a massive skills gap, to be honest. And it does seem mysterious because we're not thinking about efficiency gains, either because of what I mentioned earlier. People are hiding those efficiency gains because they're afraid they're going to efficiency gain themselves out of a job or whatever, or that culture is just not there to kind of discuss those things. There is the whole thing about there is a lot of stress in being underemployed. I remember the occasions where I've been underemployed, I've developed depression, anxiety, guilt, and it's things about, even though no matter how many times you can ask to be, more gainfully employed by your manager, for example, give me more work, give me more interesting things to do. If it's not there because that culture is not there, or because they don't have the kind of foresight to think about how do we automate this and make this more efficient, then you do develop guilt about not working to your best. You feel like you're going to get found out, and then there's that whole cycle of like, oh, well, then will I be fired? You can't win either way. You either make yourself so efficient that that job's no longer necessary, or you hide the fact that you're so efficient, and then you get fired because it looks like you're doing nothing. It's that kind of thing. But there was another article I was listening to. It was a TED Talk actually, and it was about how stress and overwork leads to a physical response. So when you're poorly, unwell, feeling a bit sick, there is a reason why you don't want to do anything. Not just the physical reason why you don't want to do anything, but scientists have discovered that your body actually purposely makes you depressed. Now, not full on depression, not clinical depression, but depresses you to an extent where it's basically telling your body, I don't want you to have an enjoyment out of anything. I want you to just sit and get better. And I got to thinking about how, in this article that I wrote, how that idea of that stress response, that your body physically telling you, I don't want you to do anything, I just want you to get better, could also lead to more insecure behaviors. Because, again, it's that whole thing about apathy and literally having a physical chemical response that tells you don't do anything. And if you're stressed and overworked or underutilized, how that might have an impact. So yeah, I will put a link into the article there, and also to Ethan's article as well. I think it's really interesting stuff. Potentially a talk out of it. I don't know. It might be a nice companion piece to another talk I do, which looks at Glassdoor. It's called This Company Sucks, how your next cybersecurity incident might be easier to spot than you think. And that's me looking at, it was a large language model analysis on Glassdoor and how keywords on Glassdoor link to eventual breaches. It's interesting stuff, but I think there's definitely something in about how a workplace makes you feel. And that's not only being overworked, but also underworked, and how that might lead to more cybersecurity incidents.
I think a lot of companies as well, for the most part, a lot of companies do run, I'd say, to the point where they're running quite hot and people are time poor. And that means that they're spending their time doing busy work when they could be doing more creative work. Even in, I think, in things like the NHS, the amount of time wasted on administration that could be spent with patients if you can automate as much of that as possible, or make time savings as much as possible, then it means better outcomes. I think if people spend time doing the human bits rather than the robotic bits, because filling out rekeying things, filling out spreadsheets with the same values. That's robotic. That's robotic behavior. It's not very human-like.
No, it's not.
Mm.
Jeff, this is season 2. Can you
Mm.
believe it? We've had so many episodes. What has been your highlight over season 2, and what would you recommend to our listeners if maybe this is the first time they're coming to us, because it's Groovy AI Talk, and Groovy AI Talk seems to do well. It seems to be some of our most popular shows, to the point where we've talked about doing a spin-off series, haven't we, Jeff, on AI?
Yeah.
But for now, you'll just get these occasional episodes. But if you're new to the show, we've got some recommendations for you of ones that we've really enjoyed. We've enjoyed them all, don't get me wrong, but there's been some really, really interesting stuff discussed. So, Jeff, what's been your favourite of this season so far?
Oh, so I mean, obviously, editing them all, we get to listen to them all back again. Although we do alternate editing, so don't hear all of them in the same level of depth. I mean, while you record, it's interesting. While you're recording, sometimes you pick up that there's some really interesting ideas while you're recording. But obviously, as you're trying to host as you're recording, it's kind of like trying to wear two hats at once. It's only when you go back and edit and then produce the show notes, you could go, oh, these are really punchy and interesting things, and you naturally, because you did a lot of recording, you forget how good some of the content is, and it's all really, really good. I think personally, I think Beck McEwen's episodes, they were just so they had so much insight in them, and I think also because of the interesting background she came from, things like the military, and talking about how they do hot washes and cold washes and things like that. I thought it was really, really interesting because it aligned very well with cybersecurity maneuvers. I mean, as you mentioned, all of the episodes are great. We can't really have favorites, but I particularly enjoyed Beck's 2 episodes. How about yourself?
And I think our audiences will agree. Her episodes are extremely popular, and yeah, she's done a fantastic job. I really liked our chat with Amy Kupas, and she was talking about really illuminating what does a Scrum Master do. Because I know that a lot of cybersecurity people are just like, well, what do they do? Are they managers? What do they, what are retros? What are sprints? And why are they always sprinting and things like that? So I thought that was a really interesting topic. Damian, early on in the season, talking about how he's a data-driven storyteller, user research, UX kind of specialism. It's a man with many hats, actually. I mean, it'd be a disservice to kind of just pigeonhole them in those boxes. But his talks, particularly, how do you make a BAFTA-winning cybersecurity awareness program? I thought that was amazing. Another episode that I want to give like a really special shout out to, is James talking about the lights. So that episode's called "That's Illuminating." So he was talking about what happens if someone hacks into street lights, and how do you go protecting those? And he talked from experience, because it was a client of his, a Scottish council was a client of his, and he had to think about like, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? So that was a really interesting one.
And I actually got to use one of the techniques we learned from our guest as well, from Sabrina. She went over the objective-centric risk modeling. I hope I got that acronym right. Actually, when we were talking about some objectives, and we need to think about the risks, it's like, well, let's do it that way. And actually, it worked really well, and it was very visual, and people grokked it immediately. So it's actually an incredibly useful tool for us to go through.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and Paula as well. Paula's episode was fantastic. All about change, like putting it into the context where she was talking about how change is constant. It kind of just made me think, oh yeah, it is. And so when you start thinking about change being constant, actually, it kind of makes you feel a lot more prepared to go out and face it. So that was really good. And then obviously we got another data specialist in. Jen came in and did a talk for us. And the episode before this one comes out is David Burkus talking about organizational culture. So we've had some fun ones. It's been great. I have to admit, I don't know about you, but for those who are watching the video, I think my podcast art is really coming along over the years. So I mean, this has been, to me, that to me is also the win. Is that the podcast art has got better.
It is really impressive. And what do we have to look forward to in season 3, which is coming up soon?
Yeah. So, folks, we are taking a short break, 2 weeks. It might even just be 1 week, depending, because this episode has. We're already recording now. It's been a little bit while, so this might be a 2-parter. Who knows? We'll figure that out in the wash. This might just be the podcast audio version might just be a shorter version, might be just 1 episode. If we deem our ramblings to be any good, we might do a 2-parter. But I think what will happen is the video version will be longer. That'll probably be the case. But we are due back properly in force for season 3 on May 9th. And we've got some fantastic guests in. A good friend of ours, Martina, she is amazing. I'm really looking forward to sharing her insights. She's a UX specialist, but the way she goes about things is such a breath of fresh air. She's going to totally inspire you. We've got the author John Sills in. He's amazing. And Bettina. There's loads of great people to look forward to. All from different backgrounds, so psychology, risk, organizational culture, more software developers in, more people from the data space, more people from other areas of tech, and likely probably more discussions around AI. And also we're hoping to get a special episode in where we talk with someone we met recently at a conference who talked all about IT in films, and we're going to do a special episode on cybersecurity films.
Yeah.
So that'll be a fun little episode there for us.
It's one of the other things to mention before we sign off is the nominations are open for the UK Cybersecurity Blogger Awards.
Yes. So we have a big ask for our listeners. Please, could you help us? We would be so delighted. We hope we put lots of effort into this and give you a really good product. We hope the feedback we get, it has been amazing. People saying that, when they're listening to it, they listen with a pen because they're making notes on all the fabulous things our guests are saying and really taking that into their organizations. We hope that you really do get a lot out of this. We absolutely adore putting these shows together for you. Little favor to ask you, and we will put this in the show notes. The European Cybersecurity Blogger Awards is coming out soon. We would really love a nomination. That award in particular is a People's Choice Award, so it's not based on things like listener numbers or anything like that. It's about how good quality products you think that we deliver for you. So if you could drop us before the end of the month a little nom there, that'd be great. There's another awards coming out as well. You've got a little bit more time for that one. That closes in May. So the European Cybersecurity Blogger Awards closes in April. I think we've got a week. By the time this episode comes out, you've got a week to apply. And then the Real Cyber Awards is in May. Again, it would be really great to have a nomination there. It helps us get really interesting guests. I hope you think that we've had some interesting guests. I know I certainly do. But it really helps us kind of bring in those interesting guests so that we can keep learning and keep sharing all the amazing insights that we've been getting from having cybersecurity from a totally different perspective. And just one more other thing as well is just on that point of if you are going to vote for us, if you can give us any feedback on the show in general, we'd really love that. Either by literally putting in reviews into your podcast app of choice or giving us a 5-star rating. That would be really wonderful. But also if you can just message us, do you like the format? Do you like these end of show episodes? Do you like the length of the shows? We try and keep them sub 45 minutes where we can. Do you want longer? Do you want shorter? What do you like? We really would love to know to make these shows the very best we possibly can for you. So that's just another call out. It's just more feedback, please. That'd be really, really appreciated.
Well, links to everything we've discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes. If you like the show, please do leave us a review and a share on LinkedIn or in your teams. I mean, it really helps us to spread the word and get high quality guests like us on in future episodes.
And we hope that this has been an interesting chat for you. See you next time. Keep secure, and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?